Okay. They can edit that part out, right?
Yeah, it's already online.
Nice.
Although wait, they wouldn't have heard anything.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that ain't right.
I mean, if you want me to adjust one, I figure it out.
Let's see. Well, how does that sound to you? Okay. Is it ear-splittingly loud?
Oh, it's fine. We don't need it in the room, but I don't know if you're being recorded.
Yeah.
It's going out
Okay.
Yeah.
onto YouTube, so it's
Yeah.
public free.
Yeah, that's a little better.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So give yourselves time to settle in whatever posture you're using. So either in a chair or sitting cross-legged or sitting in seiza, the main qualities of your lower body should be that it's solidly planted and it promotes balance, right? So if you can feel kind of even down pressure on the right and left sides of your body and your lower body, or if you're sitting in a chair, if your feet are solidly planted and your butt is solidly planted on the chair, that's good, right? Because it allows the upper body to be upright, largely because it's balanced, right? The main detail to play with your lower body posture, well, there's two things to think about. One that is true for everybody, and the other which is true mostly for people who are sitting on a mat, right? But for sitting, so just to make sure that your pelvis is neither tilted too far forward or too far back, really somewhere right in the middle is best, where you can feel light engagement in both the muscles in your stomach and the muscles in your lower back without having either of them crimped or any of the joints in your sort of down here above your pelvis feel crimped or bowed, basically. So balance your pelvic tilt, right? And then the other one, if you're sitting cross-legged and you discover that that it's hard to feel comfortable, something about your lower body posture feels uncomfortable or too tight or unbalanced or something like that. One of the things you can play with is the height of your seat. So some people actually sit on two zafus, and some people take little support cushions and stuff them under either their sit bones to elevate themselves more, or under a joint on the right hand or left hand side of their body in order to balance it and make it more comfortable. Any of that's fine, right? But just to kind of over time work with your lower body posture such that it promotes a kind of balanced uprightness and feels like a platform on which you could sit for 100 years, right? Then up above that, there's a way to have your chest be lifted where it feels like it's being supported largely by your breath and maybe by some kind of notional pillar that's supporting your sternum and standing in your lower abdomen, in your hara, basically. What that does is it allows the muscles in your upper back to soften. It rolls your shoulders out so that they're balanced pretty handily in the middle of the body, right? And so that the energy in the shoulders is out. And if you bring your arms around in a circle, place your left palm on top of your right palm, and then bend your thumbs around so that they make another circle. You can form this. This is the cosmic mudra, right? If that's not comfortable, then you can, put your hands on your knees, but equally the energy in your shoulders should be sort of out like this. So if you're forming the cosmic mudra, find the sweet spot for it where the little fingers of both hands are lightly resting against your lower abdomen, and your thumb tips are kind of around the level of your navel. There's a spot there, and on everybody's body it's a little different, but where the effort that's required to hold your hands like that is minimal, and where your arms and hands, and particularly the space between your hands, it's kind of feel like they warm up, right? Because all the blood and neuromuscular energy is sort of flowing smoothly. So with respect to your head, let your head float up off your shoulders. Allow your face to fall into a sort of vertical plane with your nose right above your navel. Shut your mouth and your teeth. Let your tongue rest against the roof of your mouth in the front. Kind of make sure the muscles in your neck are kind of relaxed and soft. You don't want to, it's tempting to clamp your jaw down. That eventually starts to get uncomfortable. So let your jaw, your chin just rest on the platform of muscle that runs around here. And with respect to your gaze, let your gaze be soft, open, and very wide. You'll notice that if you allow your gaze to settle and take in the periphery, it has this almost instant effect on your state of mind. So just to note that and to sort of stay close to it. And then the last bit is maybe make 3 to 5 really concerted breaths in which you bring a little tension into your hara, this place down at the sort of bottom of your diaphragm. And I forget what it's called in the yogic tradition, but it's one of the locks in the yogic tradition. Someone knows, they can tell me afterwards, and I'll write it down so I won't forget it next time. But anyway, well, maybe place a little tension there, and then let the breath fall completely out of the body. And then at the bottom of your breath cycle, pause. And then when the breath wants to come in again, just allow it. Just let go of any tension, but keep your attention here. And the kind of subjective impression is that the breath is rising up out of the heart and filling the body. You'll notice that if you do that, particularly the out breath can sometimes realign your upper body posture in a way that's beneficial. So it's like you're getting massage every breath, right? So after a few breaths like that, just let your breathing settle down to its natural rate and its natural depth, but stay close to it. When you can, keep your attention in your hara. And allow that attention to be a counterweight to the other phenomena that are competing for your attention, about which we'll talk in a bit. as I suggested, some other things may, by this point, be competing for your attention. Bodily sensations, sensations from your array of sensors, your ears, your eyes, your nose, etc. And then also what they call in the scheme that was invented to talk about in a Buddhist context, to talk about human subjectivity, your mental formations, right? Which include models for agency. I could do this with my body, right? But also explanations, self-narration, etc. All of that thinking. Whatever it is, when you become aware of it, why don't you try this on for size? Notice the way in which, in particular sensations, physical sensations, create a whole cascade of responses. The sensation arises, and because of some features that it has, it vaults into our awareness and becomes a perception, right? And then that perception almost always calls forth kind of a signifier and maybe even a little bit of an explanation, right? And those things invite additional thinking, additional narration. And in some ways, they create a whole world. They from nothing, all of a sudden, this is the world in which I have a twinge in my knee, right? Fascinating. And then just as readily, if you just let that process play out, that world disappears completely, and the next world comes into being, the world in which I'm hearing some hum from the air conditioning unit. Just watch how that works in as intimate detail as you can, moment by moment. That's what the founder of the Zen School in Japan calls studying the self. So before we do anything else, does anybody have any questions or comments about Zazen, about the posture, about anything? Any questions or thoughts? Great. So in order to rest up a bit, I thought we'd do some walking meditation. So maybe 10 minutes or so. So if you could stand up, and maybe we can like get in a circle outside the outside the mats, and then we'll go on from there. Yeah. So let's do it this way. Everybody turn to your left. Right? And then on the next out breath, move your left foot forward and plant it, and pretty not all that far forward, right? And through that breath, transfer your weight onto that foot, and then on the in breath, lift the other foot, not all the way off the ground, just onto the ball of it. Over there while you breathe in, and then on the next out breath, plant the other foot. And that's it. Everything else about this is exactly the same as Zazen. The upper body posture, the engagement with the eyes, the engagement with the breath. Doesn't matter how slow or fast you go. But I guess if you notice that you're creeping up in front of the person in front of you, you could slow down a little, that's all. But it's really not a big deal. And the way to slow down is just to shorten your steps, right? Just to kind of feel the way in which you're kind of like a gecko when you're doing this. It's like the foot comes off the floor and then it spreads and sticks to the floor, like maybe you could even do kinhin up a wall. I don't necessarily suggest trying that, but all right, let's go back and sit down. Let's do it. So any questions about kinhin, as long as we're at it? Hmm?
What was the name?
The walking, kinhin, it's the Japanese term for walking meditation. Sorry. Well, all right. So I'm going to talk about a koan. It's case 5 from the Blue Cliff record. And so the way I'd like to do this is, everybody sit comfortably, pay attention to what's going on. And then I'm going to recite the koan a couple of times. It's pretty short, right? And without a lot of explanation. And what I'd like you to do is just listen. And if anything jumps out, if a particular phrase feels intriguing or meaningful or funny or anything, if some idea pops into your head, any of those things, and anything that happens, and including, bafflement and discomfort, any possible reaction is great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, call on you and ask you to talk about anything that came to mind. And, if the answer is absolutely nothing, that's a good answer too. So we'll do that. I mean, I guess the only things I'd say in advance are, this is a lot of these stories involve interactions between people. This is just this guy, Shuido, giving a talk, right? So he's not interacting with anybody. He's just, giving a Dharma talk. And we'll talk a little bit later about who he is and so on and so forth. So here's the story. So Shuido was giving a talk one day, and he said, pick up the whole universe in your hand, and it's about the size of a grain of rice. Throw it down on the floor, and if, like a lacquer bucket, you still don't get it, I'll beat the drum and call everyone to have a look. So I guess the only thing that maybe bears some explaining there is that lacquer bucket is a kind of a trope in the literature, and it has a special significance for Shuido because I'm sorry, I'm so wrong about this. Shui Feng is this guy, the guy that compiled the collection is Shuido. This guy, the teacher we're talking about, his name is Shui Feng. My mistake. But anyway, so he, Shui Feng, who was the guy that said this, as we'll talk about this a little bit later, but worked as a rice cook at monasteries, and often rice is cleaned and sorted in a lacquer bucket, right? So if you don't get it, if you're like a lacquer bucket and you don't get it, then I'll beat the drum and have everyone come and look. So again, right? Shui Feng gave a talk, and he said, pick up the whole universe. It's in your hand. It's like the size of a grain of rice. Now, pitch it down on the floor. If you're like a lacquer bucket and you don't get it, I'll call everyone in. I'll beat the drum and I'll call everyone in to have a look. So soak in that a little bit. Any thoughts? How about you?
I think I'm still confused about the analogy with the lacquer bucket.
Yeah, I think the lacquer bucket trope is like, it's just it's a kind of it's an inanimate object you put things in, but it's utilitarian, but kind of, kind of dumb. Calling somebody a lacquer bucket was a little bit of an insult, right? And it was special for Shui Feng because he worked as a rice cook, and he did this thing with a lacquer bucket, which we'll talk about later. So that's probably why he said it. But there's a whole bunch of other lacquer bucket koans. Like there's one where this woman is down at some pond or creek picking up water to cook with, and she dips in the bucket and is charging up the bank, and the bucket's all busted up, and the bottom falls out. And while she was carrying it, she saw that the moon is reflected in the water in the bucket, and then when when the bottom fell out, the moon disappeared, right? And so she had this moment, and she wrote a poem about it, right? And the list of references to lacquer buckets go on more or less endlessly, actually. So,
So the phrase "like a lacquer bucket" is saying, so if you're still an idiot and you don't get it,
yeah,
then I'll ring the bell.
yeah, and everyone will come in and have a look. And it's pretty clear that what he means by that is I'll call everyone in, and we'll all sit down and we'll examine the question, right? So anyway, something like that, right?
It's examine the question or examine the rice or examine the person?
Study the question of what it is about the universe that's as big as a grain of rice, and whether you can pick up that if you've thrown that thing down, whether it's possible or not to pick it up again, right? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Who else? How about you?
Well, when you said it the first couple of times, I was thinking about doing the thing and like not too worried about it, like
Mhm.
just the thing that you do and
Mhm.
like you're doing magic or something. And also it sounded very shiny, which was pleasurable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then since you've been talking about it, I was very confused about what they were going to come in and look at, and that was sort of like nicely mysterious.
Yeah.
There was a few options that were rolling around in my head. And then since other people have been talking, it made me think about like Power of 10,
Mhm.
that like film from the 60s or something,
Yeah.
where it zooms far in and far out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And the whole have a look thing, Shui Feng also is famous for koans where he says have a look, right? Like there's another famous one where he's giving a talk and he says, so on South Mountain, which I think is one of the funny things about this case is that South Mountain, I think, was quite far away from where they were sitting, right? He says, on South Mountain, there's a turtle-nosed snake, which I think means a cobra, essentially. So everyone should go have a look. So in that case, it's impossible to just go have a look, right? So what could it possibly mean in that context, right? Sorry. Well, no. This was South China. So yeah. So you could easily in South China you could probably easily run into a cobra. I've never run into a cobra in South China, but I ran into one in Thailand, which was kind of great. So slithering around under my hut, which was also kind of great. But anyway, so he, what does he mean there when to have a look means something pretty significant for and when he's talking about it, basically. And I think often it refers to taking up sitting practice and examining and studying the self, like we were doing, right? So something like that. What about you? Yeah. Any thoughts?
So taking it in.
Excellent. And in back?
I was wondering if he's gonna call them in to see that he's a lager packet. That's another way of thinking about it. That he didn't get it, so they're gonna make fun of him.
or at very least, even if they don't actively make fun of him, maybe they'll all go, well, he didn't get it, but yeah, that's a good setup for sure, right? Yeah. How about you?
Just been thinking about the concept of fitting the universe in a grain of rice. And
Yeah.
Just how everything is both infinite and infinitesimal.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah, that's great. And you?
What came to mind when you first said it was just us walking, or myself walking, and it was really nice to give attention to like, the really small movements. Sure, it's like common to have like, all right, let's go. Like that. That's a feeling
Yeah.
I had. It's kind of like, all right, let's get to it. But
Yeah.
then like, oh, like it's here. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm moving. I'm here. So something in that koan like resonated with the practice of walking.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's so in the maybe I've talked about this before, but in the Bodhisattva vow, one of the lines in the Bodhisattva vow is at least in the Zen Center liturgy, it's translated as Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them, right? But if you really look at boundless in that expression, it's not actually, doesn't actually mean boundless in the sense that we usually think of. When usually in English, when you say boundless, the thing that comes to mind is vastness, right, and space, right? If you look at the characters, it literally means like no measurement, right? So it's more like they range from infinitely small to infinitely large, and they last from an infinitesimal amount of time to the whole life of the universe, right? Those and the when you say I vow to enter all of them, it essentially each, did anyone ever go to the Christo installation in New York, the gates? You ever see that? Yeah.
The Shinto gate thingy.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, did you see that?
I think I saw like a video about it in class.
Cool. Yeah. So you went? Yeah, nice. Yeah, I went too. Yeah, I mean, it's like that, right? You're let me see if I can find this. I wrote a poem about it. Let's see. I passed through, zipping up my orange sweatshirt. The note that the gates were all orange, right? So, zipping up my orange sweatshirt, I passed through. At long last, I passed through, trailing a long chain of missteps clamped around my left ankle. I passed through. Eating a spoonful of carrot ginger soup, I passed through. Intentionally lost, hectored by crows, fallen, I passed through for the nth time. Also, unzipping my orange sweatshirt, I passed through. Bending double like the knee of a grasshopper, I passed through. An old house with peeling paint let itself out by a side door. Rising like a flock of 5,000 paper birds, I passed through. Someone is standing to one side, feigning indifference and taking copious notes. Just this once, I passed through, in spite of the fact that the gate was just painted on the sky. Arriving here in this pool of orange light, feeling the unexpected roughness of the toll taker's fingers against my palm. So something about the gates, we're always being given the opportunity to step through a gate and wake up, right? And those gates are everywhere all the time, tiny and giant, right? And so that means that when you reach down and grab anything, even a grain of rice, and you pick it up, you're essentially holding the whole world, right? You're holding the fabric of the entire universe by this one point, right? And also internally, when a sensation like holding a grain of rice between your fingers arrives, as I was saying when we were sitting, it kind of makes it recreates the model for the world that we're carrying around with us and navigating in, right? So in both senses, right, it's kind of you're holding the whole world in in between your fingers, like a grain of rice. And if when you drop it, right? So I was sort of talking about this while we were sitting, right? So if you really attend to the sort of coming and going of sensation and perception, right? Including thought, what you notice is that there's this natural rhythm to it where, a sensation arises. It's, a twinge in my knee, because of its valence or importance, either important or not, right? It rises up and becomes a perception that touches my awareness, right? My subjectivity. The vast majority of sensations that each of us is experiencing right now will never be perceived because we're just not paying attention to them, right now, right? Your body is telegraphing to your brain a map of itself that tells you, for example, where the tip of your little toe on your left foot is right now. But it's quite possible that you're not paying attention to that. You're paying attention to something else, right? Which is okay, right? That's how we're built. But the point is that we're presented with this massive array of information, right? And we throw away most of it, and then some of it rises up into our consciousness and kicks off this process where it's matched against our memory, and where a possible match is pulled out, and maybe it acts as an explanation, right? So sometimes those explanations are words or symbols. Sometimes they're images. Sometimes they're difficult to even put a finger on, but we somehow recognize them, right? And that process happens naturally and pretty seamlessly all the time, and we can be present with it and watch the way in which perceptions arise and go away, and arise and go away in a way that's pretty unloaded and doesn't really make a big deal out of the fact that we're a self, right? That we're a separate entity. But when in the course of that sort of cycle of attention and process, thoughts arise. Thoughts are a lot stickier than, say, twinges in my knee or the sound of a bird, right? And there's a certain gravity to thinking and rumination and self-narration and sort of telling stories about the self and so on that can be very involving, right? And is kind of the source of human suffering, right? And so the proposition of practice is that by being with that and noticing it, noticing how it works, and just being present with it, it becomes more and more increasingly possible to hold all of that, the bodily sensations, the contents of our sensorium in general, and the thinking in a container that's broad enough to hold all of it, and not be so tangled up in and focused on thinking, right? So the story of Shui Feng's life kind of illustrates this, right? So he was a kind of sharp, diligent guy, and he went to Dongshan's place and volunteered to be the rice cook, right? And so he was one of those people that's always going around and kind of maybe showing off a bit or something like that. And so one time Dongshan comes into the kitchen and he goes, so what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm washing the rice. And he has his big bucket, right? that he's putting water in and trying to get the grit out of the rice. And Dongshan says, so are you washing away the grit or are you washing away the rice? And not one to be baited in that way. Shui Feng says, oh, they're both washed away. And Dongshan says, okay, what are we going to eat? And Shui Feng kicks over the rice bucket and spills the rice out on the floor. And Dongshan says, you know what? I think you need to go to another monastery. And he sends him off to Dershan's place, right? And presumably he cleaned up the rice and served it before he left. But he goes to Dershan's place and he arrives, and the first thing he does is he walks up to Dershan and he says, do I have a place a place and a stake in this important matter that's been passed down since forever? This sort of the essential matter, this study and practice and so on, and Dershan hits him and says, what are you asking? Right? And he has this momentary flash of insight. And so, but he still is kind of unsettled and so on and so forth. And at one point later on, he has a friend, this guy named Yanto. And he and his friend are walking around somewhere in China, and they get snowed in on a mountain, and they're in this little tiny shack, and Yanto, who's pretty relaxed guy is sort of lounging around, and Shui Feng is sitting there meditating. And finally, after all, Yento says, "Give it a rest, guy. Come on." And Shui Feng says, "But my heart isn't at peace, right?" And so Yento goes, "Okay, fine. So tell it to me from the beginning. Talk to me about your experience with practice and your kind of the insights and other things you've had." And he goes, "Well, when I asked Dushan that about whether I have a stake in this whole thing, and he hit me, I had an insight." And Yento says, "From this moment on, never speak of it again." Right? And he goes through one after another all the things that he's kind of realized over the course of his extremely long career of wandering around China, studying and studying with various teachers. And finally, Yento says, "Don't you get it? It has to come out of your own heart and cover the world," right? And finally, he kind of wakes up, right? So, and then he's bouncing around the cabin and going, "Oh, this is so great," and so on and so forth. But he went on to become a really, great and skillful teacher. But I guess the point of that whole story is that that moment where you realize the way this whole thing works, and realize the way that this process that I was talking about earlier both leads, is built into us, right? But also and can be tremendously beneficial and helpful, and also is a source of suffering, right? When you finally realize that it's possible to hold that in a different way, then your life shifts around, and it's not all of the things that not all, most of the things you thought were a problem are not really so much of a problem anymore, right? And there's a bunch of ways for that to happen, but the proposition of the Zen school is that it almost always happens in the context of relationships, mostly between people, but also between people and, say, cats, or people and things. And because relationships and the contact that they involve can lead to surprise or other forms of experience that point in the direction of a different mode of engagement, basically. So any questions about that before I move on? Great. So I wrote a poem for this one too, so I'll dig that one up too. And then if you don't have any questions, we can sit a little bit more. Where is it? Here. So I have a project to write a poem for every case in the Blue Cliff record, and it's going very slowly, which is what you'd expect. But the one I did for this case goes like this. Woodpecker drops like a lightning bolt, then carves a long curve in the shimmering air and skims out of sight along the riverbank. Even the river stands stock still to watch. So, one more opportunity to ask or say anything.
Read it again slowly.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Woodpecker drops like a lightning bolt, then carves a long curve in the shimmering air and skims out of sight along the riverbank. Even the river stands stock still to watch. Thank you. All right, let's sit a bit more. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question about Buddhism in general, as some of the stuff you've shared. I've been trying to work with and understand dependent origination more.
Yeah.
And there's two things that I think I might be in. First off, the thing we did today where like we're looking at senses and then sometimes the senses like start their own stories.
Yeah.
I observed where I was feeling my stomach and then I was feeling like it was like kind of full and then I felt like I'd overeaten and then I got into like a whole thing about like the way my body should look and I should work out more and then when I did work out and then where was that gym in Oakland and there was like it went on for 2 minutes.
That is awesome.
So and it all started with my stomach being a bit full.
Yeah.
And then so there was another thing I've seen though where I did a retreat that was like a lot of like non-doing sits and I opened awareness a whole bunch. And then I noticed like over the next week, sometimes like something would happen that would kind of like freak me out, like get an email and I have to move or something like that. And it would be like this wide awareness would suddenly kind of go down.
Yeah.
And then I would kind of like, it had been so big for so long, I could catch it and put it back.
Yeah. And
so I was wondering, is one or both of these things dependent origination or are they just two other different things?
Well, so they're clearly related, right? But I mean, I would say the sort of philosophical definition of dependent or interdependency. If you read the Chinese phrase, it's usually used to hold to express this. It's essentially all things real together, right? Which is kind of cool, right? I don't know how to pronounce it in Chinese, but so I think that from a philosophical perspective, dependent origination is the observation, and this goes way back to it shows up in most of the Buddhist canons we have, so it's probably a pretty early idea, right? But it's that things arise in this interdependent way, all together, mutually, and I mean, this is also, let's be clear, physics, right? I mean, honestly, that's how things arise. Is they're interdependent, and the chains of causation involved go back to the Big Bang. Basically, every single one of them goes back to the Big Bang, right? And which is and the use that was made of that idea by Nagarjuna and the people that kind of invented the philosophical underpinnings for Mahayana Buddhism was that if that's true, right? If you believe that everything arises in this richly interconnected way, where the chains of causation are too long and too complicated to unravel in any significant way, then what arises out of that is the idea of emptiness, which is that that when you look at a category, right, it's for that category may have provisional truth and it may be useful and so on. But if you look at the boundaries of the category, you realize that the category goes away, right? If you look at it too closely, right? Or maybe if you look at it from a wider perspective, right? And so that category depends on a particular narrowing of perception or something like that, right? And so Nagarjuna wrote this very complicated and almost unreadable document that sort of expounds or invents and expounds the notion of emptiness. And then Mahayana Buddhists, and in particular the Zen School, picked it up and ran with it for the next, I don't know, what is it, like 1800 years or something like that. So from a philosophical perspective, that's dependent origination. From an experiential perspective, you can absolutely be present with and participate in a conscious way in the dependent origination of all sorts of stuff, right? Including, as you said, like this this spinning up a whole thing about working out and what you eat and all the rest of it. That's a classic, right? It's great, right? And then to notice the way that, so here's another related story. Maybe I've told this story before, but I have an old friend who was at our monastery, and she was walking along. She walked by the garden, and she saw this flower that was just rivetingly beautiful, and she was just like gobsmacked, and she started to cry, and because she was so moved by the flower. And all of a sudden, this voice started in her head, and it said, with air quotes, and she was moved to tears. and then another voice came up and was like, oh, look, there you are, commenting on your experience and ruining it for yourself. And so from this like powerful connection that goes beyond words to having an argument with yourself, the intervening interval was probably 3/4 of a second or something like that before the other thing started up. So we can also observe the way in which the sort of gravity of discursive and self-narrative thought can pull our attention in and tangle it up, or it can let go and open into this sort of bigger world where it almost feels like you can, directly experience the interdependent co-arising of everything, right? Does that help? Or
It didn't sound. It sounded like maybe both. Like it kind of sounds like you're saying everything is dependent arising.
yeah, that's right. And we experience it in these particular ways that are both illustrative and also can be can be so surprising that they kind of turn us inside out. So
I think I am coming from a frame that my job is to stop dependent arising from happening.
nice.
Is that not correct? I thought that's what the whole Bahia thing was about.
Oh, interesting. Well, in what way is your job to prevent interdependent co-arising, right?
Now it sounds like I'm going to stop the universe.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, don't do it. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm not used to doing the kind of meditation where I'm like tracking where the things arise.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's like looking at the in-between space.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did to my attention was interesting. It made my attention a lot clearer and sharper,
Mm-hmm.
tracking the things that arise. But it's very rapid. So like things
Mm-hmm.
are constantly.
Yeah,
and there's
that's
a lot
exactly
happening
right.
all at once,
Yeah.
And I got a little bit like seasick.
Yeah.
And anxious, which if I switched and like pulled my peripheral back a little bit, it would alleviate the seasick, sloshy water feeling a little bit. But I don't know if I have a question. Is that something that you just like get better at with practice?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the opportunities to use this sort of yogic embodied nature of practice to help with that, right? So, there's a lot of, for example, breathing technique and a lot of it has to do with the breath, right? But where where you use the breath as an anchor and a kind of maybe anchor is the right word, to focus your attention not on a train of thought or something like that, but in the body, right?
This is mostly body thoughts, because it's so fast. Thoughts very rarely can form, and if they do form, I would get maybe max 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Or like a partial image. There's like a number of thought form styles.
Yeah, sure.
Occur, and then they're mixed in. With body sensations, and they moved in a way that was different because I was holding my attention differently. And sometimes they just kind of like get real big and far apart, and that feels like wherever my attention is slow.
Yeah.
And where my attention was this time was fast, but not linear.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe.
No, I totally understand that. Yeah. I mean, it can get very weird. Like, it turns out that you have all these clocks in your body and mind, right? And they're all run at different rates. And there's this heroic process that tries to cobble together a stream of consciousness out of that. And if you really pay attention to it, it can start to feel like time is rolling forwards and backwards because all these clocks are something is trying to line up all these clocks, right? So yeah, it can be very very tricky. And sometimes feel unpleasant, right? For any number of reasons. I would say again, like you know, to re-establish your focus on the rhythm of breath, which is slower and kind of solider or something like that, can be helpful, right? And then also from the body perspective, the kind of request for Zazen is always be sitting, which is to say always be actually forming your posture, right? Always be actually attending to breath, always be actually allowing the gaze to broaden and settle, and so on and so forth. And all of those things can act as a kind of counterweight to what you're talking about, and allow you to hold it in a container where it's more, where it's less bubbly or something like that. Does that help? Or yeah.
Is that what you meant when you said like use the hara as an anchor?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's right.
So it's,
yeah. I mean, that's the sort of methodology in Zen practice. There, other meditation schools have other methodologies, right? But in the Zen school, it's usually that. So yeah.
I think so. If it's starting to get overwhelming,
Yeah.
just go back and focus on something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, it's good.
I was getting seasick too.
Yeah.
I had a moment when it was like this half of my vision was going whoop, and this half whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
And then did it for 50 times, and
No.
then it's over.
It's like, that's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. It was really great talking with you. Thank you so much for coming. It was marvelous. I appreciate it.